let's say I had a problem, which I probably did for a while with weed. I was pretty addicted, like 15 to 25 joints a day. I mean, I've been on so many different antidepressant, anti-anxiety meds since I was like 15, 16. I've been suicidal, but never to the point of doing anything or acting on it.
After Rob Reiner's passing, the heartbreak didn't end at the funeral. Instead, it quietly shifted into something colder and far more personal. When the will was finally read, Roy and Jake were left stunned. The entire fortune, nearly $200 million built over decades of work, reputation, and legacy, had been directed to charitable foundations. In that moment, everything they thought they understood about inheritance and family changed. Grief, once heavy and slow, twisted quickly into shock and then into anger. Sources say Jake felt erased from his own family's story, as if the world beyond their home had mattered more than blood. Reports claim he lashed out, saying their parents chose a public legacy over their children. Lawyers were contacted almost immediately, setting off a legal clash that pulled the Reiner name directly into the public spotlight. As the legal process began to unfold, more details started leaking out. Layers of the family's tightly guarded private life slowly peeled away, revealing tensions few outsiders had ever seen. Nearly 2 weeks after the devastating events of December 14, 2025, the family was finally able to hold a quiet farewell, but only after the Los Angeles coroner completed all required examinations. By December 19, official records listed Jake Reiner as the informant on both certificates and the person entrusted with receiving the ashes. Documents from the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health confirmed that Rob and Michelle Reiner were laid to rest through cremation. The service took place at Mount Sinai Mortuary, a respected Jewish funeral home in the Hollywood Hills, long associated with some of the industry's most beloved figures. The location itself carried deep meaning within the Jewish community, following traditions that emphasize swift and respectful arrangements. Still overwhelmed by loss, Roy and Jake handled everything quietly. There were no cameras, no crowds, no public spectacle, only a small circle of loved ones gathered, honoring a deeply personal decision made away from the public eye. The ashes were brought to Jake's home, keeping their parents close during the heaviest days of mourning. Sources say no final resting place has been chosen yet, leaving one last chapter painfully unresolved. Some quietly suggested that the ashes may one day be scattered in a meaningful place, or partially laid to rest in a family cemetery. For now, that decision remains suspended in grief and uncertainty. But whatever calm existed did not last long. Just days later, cameras from major outlets captured Roy and Jake entering a high-profile Beverly Hills law firm known for handling elite Hollywood inheritance disputes. Both men wore dark clothing, sunglasses pulled low, faces visibly drained. They offered no statements, not a single word. As photographers shouted questions, the images spread instantly. Headlines followed just as fast, splashed with claims of a $200 million inheritance battle. Speculation exploded. Why were lawyers involved so quickly? Why now? There had been no official announcement about asset distribution, no confirmation of conflict. And yet the silence only fueled the questions, pulling the family deeper into a storm they hadn't publicly acknowledged. The will hadn't even been formally opened yet, and still the pressure was already closing in. Roy remained silent, her expression heavy and distant, while Jake walked slightly ahead, positioning himself between her and the cameras, almost like a shield. The message was unspoken but clear: protection first, answers later. Reporters pressed closer, voices overlapping as sharp questions filled the hallway. Who would control the estate? Had trustees already been named? Had the will been validated yet? One voice shouted over the others. Another pushed harder, asking who would manage the assets during the process. The questions echoed coldly, detached from the reality in front of them. These weren't power players chasing money. They were two people still deep in mourning. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, new information surfaced, and it landed hard. A source close to the family revealed that Rob had planned something almost no one saw coming. Nearly his entire estimated $200 million fortune had already been directed toward charitable foundations. At first, the revelation spread quietly, but the shock behind it was enormous. According to a longtime family friend, this decision wasn't about rejection or punishment. It wasn't meant to send a message of anger or distance. Instead, it reflected something far more deliberate, something Rob had set in motion long before the cameras arrived, an intention that would soon force everyone to reconsider what this story was really about. It reflected a belief Rob had carried quietly for years. He believed children should ultimately stand on their own. To him, too much inherited wealth risked dulling ambition and weakening a sense of purpose. A longtime friend explained that Rob often spoke about independence, saying Jake, Roy, and Nick needed to build their own paths. But his thinking was never one size fits all, and that distinction mattered deeply. With Nick, who had faced personal struggles over the years, Rob believed comfort could sometimes do more harm than good. He reportedly felt that protecting Nick indefinitely would only delay growth rather than encourage it. One close friend described Rob's mindset bluntly: handing large sums of money to someone still working through emotional challenges felt to him like adding fuel to an already fragile situation. Rob believed life itself was the real teacher, work, effort, and consequences included. Jake and Roy, however, were different in his eyes. Rob saw in them the independence he respected most. Jake had built a steady career and a life separate from his parents' shadow. Roy was deeply immersed in her creative work, constructing something meaningful step by step. Rob would even joke, "My kids can handle it, they're stronger than people think." For him, success was never measured by what he left behind. It was measured by whether his children could keep moving forward with purpose once the safety net was gone. That belief is why, long before his passing, Rob made his intentions unmistakably clear. Nearly all of his estimated $200 million fortune was directed toward charitable foundations. He believed money should keep working for society, not become a comfort blanket that quietly weakens the next generation. And Rob didn't just speak about that belief, he acted on it decisively. Sources close to the family say he personally assigned Roy the responsibility of selling the Brentwood home and other properties, with every dollar directed straight into the charitable foundations he and Michelle had supported for years. Those causes included education, healthcare, and long-standing social programs that mattered deeply to them. One family friend later recalled a quiet conversation that now feels almost prophetic. Rob once said, "Parents aren't here to build the road for their kids. They're here to teach them how to walk on their own." That belief guided him to the very end. He understood his children might feel hurt, even betrayed, but he trusted that time and perspective would eventually bring understanding. Still, that philosophy became painfully complicated once everything was set in motion. Regardless of investigations or legal technicalities, the reality was stark. None of the children were left a single cent. When that truth settled in, it hit Jake and Roy hard. What followed wasn't just paperwork or legal procedure. It was grief colliding with resistance behind closed doors at a Beverly Hills law firm. Sources say the siblings confronted their legal team in disbelief. Roy, overwhelmed, reportedly broke down and said, "This isn't fair." Jake reacted differently, more raw, more explosive. He allegedly said their parents chose to care for the world but forgot their own children. Those words weren't about greed. They came from shock, loss, and a sudden feeling of being pushed outside a legacy they thought they were part of. Those reactions came from deep pain, from the feeling of being erased by the very people who had taught them empathy and compassion. Jake and Roy weren't attacking charity itself. They were fighting the sense that their place in the family story had been quietly removed. Determined not to let that stand, they began exploring every possible legal path forward. They reviewed timelines, trust structures, and clauses that might be challenged. Every document was examined, every decision was questioned. Soon after, they assembled a heavyweight legal team known for handling high-profile Hollywood inheritance battles. Their first meeting was tense. One attorney reportedly warned them directly, "If you want fairness, this will be long and it will be brutal." Jake didn't hesitate. "We're not afraid, we've already lost everything," he said. Witnesses later described that moment not as a legal calculation but as a verdict of the heart rather than the court. From there, the strategy took shape quickly and decisively. The plan was bold: challenge the charitable foundations directly, arguing they had stripped the biological children of any real connection to their parents' legacy. Behind closed doors, the siblings' intentions became unmistakably clear. This wasn't about securing a portion or compromise. They wanted everything returned to the family. Roy, quieter but just as resolute, reportedly said, "I don't want a portion, I want it all. They're gone, and we're left with nothing." Their attorneys issued a clear warning. Going after public charities could trigger intense backlash and permanently damage their parents' public image, but by then the line had already been crossed. Jake didn't back down for a second. "Public opinion isn't my family." That single line captured the storm tearing through the Reiner household, a collision between principle and pain. As emotions hardened, the legal team began gathering everything they could find: private journals, old emails, Personal notes. Anything that might suggest Rob's final decisions didn't fully reflect his emotional state at the end. One attorney reportedly told them bluntly, "This isn't just about money, it's about redefining what your father's legacy really means." And that's exactly what it became. This was no longer just a courtroom fight, it turned into a collision of grief, love, and long-buried resentment. The very values Rob had preached for decades, independence, accountability, self-reliance, had become the spark that fueled Jake and Roy's rebellion. This stopped being about lessons or philosophy altogether. It became about never getting the chance to ask why. Outside the home, the world continued to celebrate Rob Reiner as a symbol of compassion and justice. Inside the family, everything was quietly fracturing over the same ideals he lived by. One family friend said softly, "He believed they would understand. He just left before hearing they weren't ready." And just like that, the will became more than a legal dispute. It transformed into a painful reflection on love, legacy, and loss. Proof that even generous intentions can leave wounds no inheritance can ever fix. For decades, Rob and Michelle were admired as one of Hollywood's most socially driven couples. Now their final chapter revealed a harder truth. Sometimes the values meant to guide a family forward can also pull it painfully apart. That passion shaped Rob and Michelle's entire lives, reaching far beyond Hollywood and into the foundations of society itself. From early childhood education to equality and human rights, they didn't simply support causes, they helped build movements. The I Am Your Child Foundation became a living monument to that mission. A non-profit focused on the most critical early years of life, reaching millions of families across the country. Its message spread powerfully through educational films like I Am Your Child, The First Years Last Forever, featuring voices such as Tom Hanks and Oprah Winfrey. The impact was undeniable. It reshaped how an entire generation of parents understood early learning, emotional development, and the long-term effects of childhood experiences. And Rob didn't stop there. Building on that momentum, he launched Parents Action for Children, pushing neuroscience and child psychology directly into public policy debates. One of their most ambitious milestones followed soon after. Rob led the campaign for Proposition 10, placing a small tax on tobacco products and funneling those funds into First 5 California. The result was billions of dollars invested in health, education, and early development programs for young children across the state. Rob's drive for equality extended even further. He co-founded the American Foundation for Equal Rights, which played a historic role in challenging restrictive marriage laws. That fight helped lead to the landmark 2015 United States Supreme Court ruling that changed marriage rights nationwide. And now that same legacy, built on helping others, sits at the center of a family quietly tearing itself apart. Where ideals meant to uplift the world have become painfully personal. While Rob was often the public face, Michelle was the strategist working quietly behind the scenes. She coordinated press outreach, mobilized artists, and ensured that every campaign carried real heart beyond their own foundations. Together, the couple consistently supported social causes tied to education, mental health, and recovery programs, helping people rebuild their lives with dignity and opportunity. Much of that giving remained deliberately out of the spotlight. Rob believed real charity didn't need applause, even when it intersected with filmmaking. He blended art with purpose, weaving themes of humanity and empathy into his work. Beyond the screen, he often hosted private charity screenings, raising funds for community programs that ranged from early childhood education to civil rights initiatives. Michelle, as a producer, proved to be the perfect partner. She fused creativity with compassion, turning ideas into action. Few people realized that the two also served on multiple advisory boards across California, particularly those focused on child welfare and early education. They didn't just lend their names, they showed up. They attended long meetings, reviewed reports line by line, and debated budgets to ensure every dollar truly mattered. Rob and Michelle were never symbolic figures. They were hands-on, deeply invested, and relentless about impact over the years. They also hosted high-profile fundraisers supporting national candidates and causes they believed could drive long-term change. To those who worked alongside them, their commitment wasn't occasional. It was constant, deliberate, and deeply personal. At one point, Rob even considered running for governor of California, but he ultimately stepped away. Advocacy and storytelling mattered more to him than personal ambition. When national issues surfaced, Rob didn't stay silent. In 2017, he co-founded an independent committee focused on election-related concerns, with Michelle by his side every step of the way. They also co-produced documentaries such as God and Country, examining the intersection of faith and political influence in modern America. Their impact wasn't measured only in donations or headlines, it showed up in tangible change. Millions of children gained improved access to early education. Countless couples saw expanded rights and legal recognition. Progressive ideas found a louder voice in Hollywood because of their work. So when news spread that Rob planned to direct nearly all of his wealth toward charity, those closest to him weren't surprised. It aligned perfectly with the life he had lived. For Rob, generosity was never about luxury, it was about purpose. That realization raises another question. How did Rob Reiner build such an enormous fortune in the first place? The answer traces back to a lifetime inside the entertainment industry. His journey began with acting, particularly his breakout role on All in the Family, which turned him into a household name and opened doors that would define his career. But the real wealth came behind the camera. As a director and producer, Rob delivered hit after hit, building not just financial success, but cultural influence that would last for decades and ultimately fund the causes he believed in most. Films like When Harry Met Sally, Misery, A Few Good Men, The American President, and Stand By Me weren't just cultural classics, they were box office powerhouses. During his peak in the late 1980s, Rob reportedly earned directing fees in the tens of millions per film, along with lucrative back-end profit shares that continued paying long after theaters went dark. That rare mix of creativity and sharp business sense transformed Rob from a well-known actor into one of Hollywood's most respected filmmakers. A major financial turning point came in 1987, when he co-founded Castle Rock Entertainment. The company quickly became an industry powerhouse, producing legendary projects such as Seinfeld and The Shawshank Redemption. When Castle Rock was sold and restructured in the early 1990s, Rob received a massive payout tied to his ownership stake. Real estate also played a crucial role in building his fortune. In 1991, Rob purchased his Brentwood home from Norman Lear for approximately $4.75 million. Today, that property is estimated to be worth between $10 million and $13.5 million. He also owned a beachfront villa in Malibu's exclusive Colony area. Purchased for roughly $4 million, it is now valued at up to $20 million and has reportedly rented for as much as $150,000 per month. Add in multiple luxury properties across Beverly Hills and prime Los Angeles neighborhoods, and the picture becomes unmistakably clear. Rob Reiner's wealth was built through decades of strategic success, long before the question of where it would ultimately go ever arose. Decades of relentless storytelling, smart deals, and long-term thinking built the fortune that would later sit at the center of one of Hollywood's most emotional inheritance battles. Over time, a booming Los Angeles real estate market helped those holdings multiply, locking in Rob's financial security for decades and quietly expanding the legacy he was still actively shaping. But real estate was only part of the story. Rob's creative work continued paying long after the cameras stopped rolling. Iconic projects like This Is Spinal Tap and When Harry Met Sally never disappeared. They stayed in constant rotation, airing worldwide, streaming across platforms, and steadily generating royalties year after year. Each payment seemed modest on its own, but stacked over decades they became enormous. One of Rob's proudest victories later in life came when he finally resolved the long-running copyright dispute tied to This Is Spinal Tap. That settlement restored both creative and financial control to Rob and his co-creators, strengthening his income far beyond the typical Hollywood cycle and reaffirming ownership over work that had shaped his career. Rob also handled money with care and discipline. He maintained a diversified investment portfolio, balancing stocks with stable assets to protect against industry downturns. These choices weren't flashy or headline-grabbing, but they kept his wealth steady during periods when he stepped back from directing. What many people continue to underestimate, however, is Michelle's role in all of this. Behind every careful decision, long-term investment, and strategic move, Michelle remained a steady presence, helping guide the structure that allowed Rob's success to endure long before the question of legacy ever came into focus. She wasn't just Rob's partner in life, she was his partner in strategy. Michelle co-produced projects, advised on creative direction, and helped guide major financial decisions behind the scenes. Her steady influence protected the family from the financial traps that have swallowed so many Hollywood names. Piece by piece, from All in the Family to Castle Rock Entertainment, blockbuster films, lifelong royalties, and prime real estate in Brentwood and Malibu, she helped shape a structure built to last. Together, Rob and Michelle built an empire estimated near $200 million, and that's where the irony cuts deepest. A fortune created through imagination, discipline, and decades of relentless work ultimately became the source of profound pain. When the will surfaced, it landed like a shockwave. Everything Rob built over more than 50 years was directed not to his children, but to causes he believed served the greater good beyond his own family. To the outside world, it looked like generosity at its highest level. To his children, it felt like distance, like being excluded from his final expression of love. Did Rob truly believe that caring meant teaching independence by leaving nothing material behind? Or was that choice shaped by years of emotional separation that no amount of money could ever repair? Those questions remain unanswered. They hang in the space between compassion and heartbreak, between intention and impact. And perhaps that's the lasting truth of this story. Not every legacy brings closure, and not every generous act feels kind to the people closest to it. If this story made you think, like this video, subscribe for more deep dives, share it with someone who'd find it meaningful, and comment below whose side do you understand more and why.